Hi, everyone. Welcome to the September Headset Data Analytics webinar. I see that people are starting to virtually file into the room. I'll be back with you in 1 minute to give another 1 minute warning, and we'll jump in and get started. Hi, everyone. Welcome again to the Headset Edibles and Beverage Market Insights webinar. See, people are still filing into the room. We will get started in about 1 minute. Hi, everyone. I'm Steve from the Customer Success team here at Headset. It's my pleasure to welcome you to another in our series of webinars about the adult use cannabis industry. Today's topic is a yummy one. We'll be discussing beverages and edibles, and we'll jump in shortly. Please be reminded to post your questions in the questions section in Zoom, and we'll handle as many as we can at the end. And first of all, just a little bit about Headset. Our mission here is to help businesses easily understand the cannabis industry through data analytics and market intelligence, enabling them to make better informed decisions, unlocking success, and pushing the industry forward. And whether you're a retailer trying to eliminate guesswork about inventory, or a vendor trying to avoid stockouts and streamline distribution, or a business trying to understand trends and opportunities, the Headset team will be there to assist you. And here to assist me today in our presentation is my colleague and mentor in all things data, Liz Connors. Welcome, Liz.
Thanks for having me, Steve.
Tell me one thing about how you're accomplished in French pastry.
Yeah, well, I went to pastry school a few years ago, not really related to analytics, but just so that I could bake for coworkers to get more favors. Though I did spectacularly flop a cake today, so not bringing in well there.
It's our birthday cake, Liz. I don't know. You may have to need a do-over there. Why don't you jump in and take it away? I know you've got a lot to cover.
Yeah, absolutely. So hi, everybody. I'm happy to be here today. Like Steve said, I'm our Director of Analytics here at Headset. And today I'm going to take you through what is mostly an edibles and beverage webinar. We've done 2 market reports. We did one back in August where we focused on the beverages market, and we did one that was released, I think it was just this week, maybe last week, Steve, on the edibles market.
It's very fresh.
Yeah, absolutely. Just like, you like your edibles super fresh, for sure. So that's the freshest of the reports. So we're going to examine some of the insights from those reports, but actually dig quite a bit deeper and see if we can get an idea of the landscape of both of these markets. But before we do that, a lot of people in these webinars are sometimes new to the cannabis market entirely. They don't know much about the market or what data we're looking at. So first, I'm just going to go through the total market size in some of the adult use states, and we're going to have a brief Canadian interlude where we talk just a bit about Canada. Not a lot, just a little bit. just enough to whet your appetite for the edibles. Have I used too many edible puns already?
No, keep going.
Excellent. All right, so without further ado, let's look at some of Headset's Insights market data. With just a little bit of ado, first let me tell you about the data that we have here at Headset. So I want to give everyone an introduction to how we collect our data. Our Insights data is transactional data. It is not from surveys. It comes from point-of-sale systems from consumers when they make purchases at the register. Our Insights data product offers market-level trends to help businesses better understand the competitive landscape of the recreational cannabis market. Insights specifically focuses on helping businesses make data-driven decisions related to product innovation, pricing, and demand planning. To create our Insights market data, we start with data collected from our participating retailers' point-of-sale systems. Currently, there are over 700 retailers connected to the Headset retailer platform, and that number grows every day. At Headset, we protect the privacy of our retailers, and our first step to do that is we aggregate, anonymize, and normalize the data of our retailers. Only retailers have access to their own data via the retailer platform. The rest of the data, it goes through an anonymizing process. From there, machine learning algorithms step in to help us normalize the disparate products in each retailer's catalog. As you know, Steve, there's no UPCs right now in cannabis, so it can be very difficult to relate products to one another. Our first step is to have robots help us in that process.
Go robots.
Excellent, yeah. So after the robots are done, we have some human data entry specialists that go through and categorize the products and assign metadata, including the product traits. These are things like what segment, perhaps it's the amount of milligrams of THC in the product, perhaps it's the strain of the marijuana that's in the product. So they assign a lot of product data for us. Finally, we take all of that data and we cleanse it to reduce noise and skew. This involves a lot of inferential statistics, which I can't see people in person, but I imagine their eyes would glaze over if I go too much deeper than that. All I'll say is those methods there help to take our sample and forecast it out to the total population. And finally, we take those sales and put them in our Insights platform so that people can take that information and make business decisions, just like the ones we're going to look at today. All right, so before we get started, let's look at the total adult use market in a few of the adult use states. This isn't all of them, but some of the larger ones. So there on the left, we see California, which is the largest market, coming in at over $200 million for the month of August. These numbers that you're looking at are for the month of August and less noted down there at the bottom on my footnote. For Washington, just under $100 million. Nevada is about half that size at $60 million. So Washington about half the size of California, Nevada about half the size of Washington. And finally, Colorado is coming in at around $130 million. These states are our 4 Insights states, and they're the ones we're primarily going to look at today. But I do want to call out that there is the Oregon market, which is about $60 million of adult use sales, and Massachusetts, which is growing. And I think in June, I believe both Oregon and Massachusetts and Canada here, June numbers, they were at about $45 million of sales. And finally, I have some Canadian information in here. So the Canadian market, this is for all of Canada, was at about $60 million that's been converted to USD in July. So still small, but definitely growing. Let's dive in and look at these 4 Insight states a little bit more. So here what we're looking at is August sales year over year. So this year, like I said, August rang in for these 4 states at just over $500 million for the month. Compared to last year, that is about 34% year-over-year growth. So still a very healthy market growth there. Over the prior year, 2017 to 2018, there was even more growth, but a lot of that was the California market coming into play. The California legalized adult use in the beginning of 2018. When we look at that growth from 2018 to 2019, what's remarkable to me about that, Steve, is the fact that that came without the addition of a new state when we're looking at just this data. So that 34% growth is organic growth within the states. Now let's quickly look at Canada. For those of you that didn't pay attention in your Canadian geography classes, there are 12 provinces in Canada, the largest of which is Ontario, which contains Toronto. The second largest is Quebec. So those are the 2 by population size that are largest. They are also the 2 by cannabis sales that are the largest as well. So you can see those down there at the bottom. For all of Canada, in June of 2019, sales rang in at $91 million. That is Canadian. So if we convert that to US to compare for US market size, it's about $70 million. I want to specifically call out Alberta there, though. Alberta had about $18 million in sales in June. Alberta is one of the provinces, or is the only province in Canada, that we offer insights in, Steve. So we have the 4 states in the U.S., California, Colorado, Washington, and Nevada, but we now also have Canadian insights starting with the province of Alberta. That's relatively new. I think we launched that within the last month or so. Those are still super new insights, but I wanted to point them out. So as we think about Canada, let's look at some of the month-over-month growth. So when we compare the month of June to the month of May, we see that in total, Canada grew about 6%, with Quebec and Ontario taking a little bit faster than average growth rate, and Alberta's in there right around 5%. What I want to point out about these numbers is these are month-over-month growth numbers. So if we took that number and forecasted it out to be what would the year growth be, we would see sales almost double within a year if that growth rate continued. So it's growing a lot faster even than our US states for sure. We here at Headset are really expecting to see Alberta grow over the late summer and early fall because they've been issuing a whole lot of retail licenses. I believe in June there were fewer than 200 retail licenses, and as of today 279 have been issued. So we'll probably see a lot of retail traction pick up there in the next few months. But let's head back to the US. Everybody grab your passport, Steve, back to the US. And here in the US, for our 4 insight states, what we're looking at is a breakdown of the category sales in August. So the first thing I want to point out is the bright green square. That is flower sales. At Headset, we take the total sales and break them down by format or category. And we have 9 major categories. Flower is the largest category, though I do want to note that flower has lost its majority market share. So Steve, flower is ringing in now at only like 43%, I think, of total sales, down from well over 50% just a year or 2 ago. Vapor pens is our next largest segment, and that is a little bit more than half the size of flower. And to round out our inhalable segments, we also have concentrates and pre-rolls. So you can see concentrates there in a navy blue at about 38 million, and pre-rolls just a bit larger than concentrates at 45. But today, what we're going to focus on instead of the inhalables is the non-inhalables. So non-inhalables are 17% of the total market, with the largest category being edibles, coming in at $60 million last month. We also see tinctures and sublinguals, topicals, beverages, and capsules. That's what makes up our non-inhalable market. Today, we're going to focus just on the edibles and beverages. So these were $65 million of sales in August. Annualized, Steve, that would be just over $750 million in those 4 states alone.
And it's those 4 states with just edibles and beverages.
Yeah, $65 million a month works out to just over $750 million. So these are very, very large markets for sure. In fact, they make up such a substantial portion that we're really excited for when Canada begins allowing these formats in the coming months. So right now, grab your passport, we'll hop back to Canada.
Let's go.
Yeah, absolutely. Here's the sales mix in Alberta as it stands over the last 3 months. So we see flower being very dominating for sure, and pre-rolls taking up about the rest of that space. A lot of this is because beverages, edibles, and vapor pens, those really large segments that we were looking at before, are not yet legal in Canada, though they will be soon. And so we're really excited to see those come into the pie and make this pie a much bigger piece. I would probably have to get a bigger screen for your computers for us to see it. All right, so now that we talked just a little bit about all of the categories, let's go ahead and dive into our edibles and beverages. So in the 4 states that we have insights in the US, like I said, we have about $65 million of sales in August. This is from a very rapid growth over the last few years. The one thing I want to note, we see a really big uptick there, Steve, at the beginning of January 2018. That's the California recreational market coming into play. We also see some peaks and valleys here. A little bit of that is due to some months having more days than others, but a portion of it is due to seasonality in the data. Both edibles and beverages tend to be a little bit seasonal. If we look at this growth, what we'll see, compared to last year, so this year, remember we had beverages coming in at around $5 million. That's a 22% growth over last year. And edibles had a 35% growth over last year. So super quick growth rates there, absolutely. But as things grow, what we wonder is, do they grow outside of the rest of the market. So our edibles growing faster than everybody else, especially those inhalable segments. Remember I said flower was losing its market share, so it must be going to someone. So if we go and look at market share, what we see is that edibles increased their market share since 2017. So in 2017, in July, edibles were making up about 9.4% of the market. Today, that stands at just under 11%. So because that market share increased, what we know is that edibles are growing faster than other categories. Beverages are relatively flat. We see about a 1.1% market share in July of 2017, over to 1% today. So we're going to dig into that trend a little bit more and diagnose it. It sounds like, oh, the sales are flat. That's maybe not that great of a thing. But when we look at it, we'll actually see some healthy growth underneath that market share change.
It also sounds like a pun if you say that.
It does, yeah. Beverages are flat. No one likes flat beverages. I'm going to try to make them not flat here in a bit. All right, so if we go through and look at market share, remember just a while ago we talked about the non-inhalable products. They were about 17% of the market in both July and August of this year, but they were comprised of 5 categories. So when we think about the categories we're talking about today, of those non-inhalable products, these 2 categories make up between 2/3 and 3/4 of that marketplace. It does vary a bit by state, with California having a slightly lesser share to these 2 categories. A lot of that's because tinctures are quite popular in California, and with Colorado and Nevada having a bit of a larger market share. I do want to point out Washington, where we see a bit more beverages than other places, and we'll come back to that in a while. So let's dig into beverages on their own. So we're going to do a set here on beverages, and then we'll hop over and do a set on edibles and really get an understanding of these markets and what they're made up of. So the first thing I want to talk about is the pricing and the market size for that matter. So remember I said Colorado had a much bigger portion of their sales going to beverages, so does Washington. We knew from our very first slide that Washington is about half the size of California in terms of recreational marijuana sales. However, they actually have more beverage sales than California. That was a really interesting finding to me, with Colorado having the most sales of all. So that really shows you how this difference in market share can play out across the different states. The other thing I'd like to talk about here is the average item price. So average item price is the average amount you would pay for a given product in the marketplace. And while we see that there is some variation, with the most expensive beverages being in Nevada, and the least expensive being in Washington, those are all the blue numbers that you see along that graph. This actually isn't a lot of price dispersion. We usually see prices be very different across the markets. For beverages, we actually see them be relatively close to each other. So this is an interesting finding for me as well.
Now, these prices are going to raise an eyebrow, Liz, so we should probably mention taxes and discounts here.
Yeah, absolutely. So when we talk about prices here at Headset, we give the price after the discount. So discounting is common. Personally, my favorite is the industry discount. But there is a lot of discounting that can take place, especially when there are promotional days, or we see a lot of discounting on 4/20, for instance, Green Wednesday. So these numbers are after discount. As it relates to taxes, these numbers are exclusive of taxes paid explicitly by the consumer. So, for instance, that's always sales tax. When you think about the receipt you get when you purchase something, you'll see the total amount of the product, and then the sales tax will be called out right there. In some states, I believe Washington is one of them, the excise tax is also explicitly paid by the consumer. In other states, the excise tax is paid before it ever gets to the consumer and is built into the prices. So that would be common in California, I believe. And so these prices should be the prices that the consumer would be expect to be paying before they pay any of the sales taxes.
Thanks.
Yeah, no worries. All right, so moving on. Let's look at that market share. Remember I told you that beverages had a relatively flat market share, but let's break that down by state and see if we can figure out why that trend exists. So here what we're looking at is the market share of beverages in 2017, hovering right around 1% in most states. In 2018, all states saw increases in market share for beverages, and we see the introduction of California with a market share of 0.6. So this is actually one of the reasons we see the market share remaining stable. It's growing in states that had beverages, but when California entered the market, it was a little bit of a lesser market share. And so that's actually what makes the trend look flat, because again, if we add 2019 here, what we see is sort of flat there in Colorado, definite growth in Washington, a little bit of a contraction in Nevada, and some growth in California. So really, when we break these down by state is when we get the better idea of how the trends are occurring. Now that we know a bit about market share, what I want to dig into as we're trying to wrap our brain around what cannabis beverages are is what that category is composed of. So here at Headset, we break every category down into segments or subcategories. In the beverages category, we have 6 segments, with one of them being other, so a little bit of a catch-all there. But primarily, we see it being dominated by carbonated beverages. So as you're looking at this graph, everybody, the bar at the very top, that's the first quarter of 2018, and we go quarter by quarter until we get down there at the bottom to Q3 of 2019, which is a partial quarter. But we see carbonated beverages being the leader and kind of retaining that. We see drops, mixes, and elixirs relatively maintaining their market share. The one I want to call out is the teal one, that is the mocktail segment. That's the one that we have really seen a lot of growth in lately. And we're going to dig into those just a little bit more and try to understand where it's coming from. But just like we did with market share, it's always important to look state by state when you have these aggregated numbers, because what we'll find is that each state is quite different. So here what we're looking at is the market share by segment across the states. This is what's currently true today. In Washington, we see about 80% of our beverage sales going to carbonated beverages. We're very heavily dominated by carbonated beverages. That's very different from Nevada. In Nevada, the most common beverage segment is iced tea, lemonade, and fruit. I imagine that's fruit drinks, not fruits. Now, I think that this makes sense when we stereotypically think about the states. There's not a lot of months for us here in Washington to kick back in the sunshine and enjoy those iced teas and lemonades. But in Nevada, where it is usually warm, usually sunny, perhaps there's a bit more space for that. In addition, in Nevada, we see mocktails being a very important segment. It is the second largest segment. And again, I think this probably plays into a lot of the market in Nevada. So a lot of the market in Nevada is around Las Vegas. And as people come, it's a really nice tourist option. It looks like something you're used to. Not everybody wants to purchase inhalables to take back to their hotel room. Nobody wants that smoking fine. So those mocktail beverages do seek a bit of growth there. Colorado is different still. Here we see that drops, mixes, elixirs, and syrups are the majority of the market. A lot of this is small packages of dissolvable powders. In fact, they're mostly unflavored powders that you'll pour into your own beverage. So BYO liquid, and then you have that powder of the THC to mix in there, and you can mix it into anything you like. It also makes the most common flavor in Colorado be unflavored, which is interesting to me. Yeah, the most common flavor is none. And then finally, if we look to California, what we see is that the carbonated beverages dominate that space. But again, pretty healthy market share there for mocktails. And the thing that, to me, that stands out a lot about California is the tea, coffee, and hot cocoa segment, which is about a quarter of the market. A lot of that is key cocoa teas in that space. All right, so moving on, that's one way that we break down categories here at Headset is by segment. The other way that we break down categories is by their package size. And when we talk about package size here at Headset, what we're talking about is the milligrams of THC in the package, not the fluid weight, not the ounces. We care about the good stuff. So what we care about is that THC. So here what we're looking at is by state, the unit volume, by the amount of THC in the package. So the first thing I want us all to note is that dark maroon bit of the graph. It looks like it's the majority in every state. Those are 100 milligram packages, so very large package sizes there. The next thing I want to point out is that in Nevada, we see a whole lot of 0 to 5 milligram package sizes. These are more single-serve beverages. They're things that maybe you'd grab a couple of them at once. There also are some heavy CBD to THC, so there's a whole lot of CBD in it, just a little bit of THC. Those are quite common in Nevada as well. In Washington, we see a lot of 10 milligrams, a decent amount of 30 milligrams, but really, again, we're still dominated by those 100 milligram packages. California, again, a little bit more dispersed there. where we're looking at everything from maybe those smaller single serves all the way up into the big packages. And then finally, Colorado. Colorado has the largest share to these 100 milligram packages, and that trend really interested me. So what we're going to do for the rest of the section on beverages is dig into this 100 milligram package size in Colorado. I was just interested, are people in Colorado, do they have really high tolerance? Is that what it is, or could there be something else going on?
It's that mountain air. It
is, yes, yeah, it really increases your tolerance to THC. I don't know that that's true. Please don't use that. You won't have a good time. But let's dig into that and see what those are composed of. So what you're looking at here is a landscape, a product landscape chart. On the left, we have the milligrams of THC in the product. So that's that y-axis. There at the bottom, or on the x-axis, we have the segments. And then the chart is populated with the total unit sales in the last 90 days, and it's colored by the amount of unit sales. So it's kind of like a heat map. The first thing I want to point out is anywhere that you see white or no number, no beverages exist in that space. So for instance, there are no iced tea, lemonade, and fruit drinks in the 0 to 5 milligram segment in Colorado, at least that we know of. So what I want to point out as the biggest thing, remember we were talking about these 100 milligram package sizes, that's very dominated by the drops, mixes, elixirs, and syrups. And actually what that is a whole lot of 100 milligram packages that have either 10 or 20 individual serve powders to mix into your drinks. The other thing that we noticed was really large in Colorado was the 10 milligram segment. And here that's primarily dominated by carbonated drinks. These are sodas with 10 milligrams in them. So those are kind of the big players. We also have in iced tea, lemonade, and fruit drinks a lot of 100 milligram packages. But anytime you're looking at the landscape, to me what I always wonder is, this is what's true today, but what was true before? And I think that's one of the places where there's a lot of opportunity to really understand how the markets are shifting. These markets shift very fast. Sometimes you can see big shifts within even a 30 or 60-day date range. So I'm going to compare it to last year because there have been some very major shifts since last year. So to do that, same graph, there on the left is the graph you were just looking at, so that's this year. And then we're looking at the same time period last year there on the right.
Still in Colorado.
Still in Colorado, yeah, still in beverages. And what I want to do is point out how different things are. So, Transformation Tuesday here on mocktails for sure. There were very little of them last year, absolutely not a lot. But this year what we see is those are really coming into play. So we see a lot of small package sizes there. Steve, up at the top, you see 3,600 units sold in that 0 to 5 milligram size. There's also some in that 100 milligram segment. But this is one where this is a segment that's growing quick, and we can see sort of what types of beverages are making up that space as we try to decide whether that's an opportunity for us to do some product innovation, not you and me, us, our customers, us. Or whether it's a space that we should be concerned about. The other thing that caught my eye straight away was that last year, the most common type of beverage you would purchase at a unit level is a 10 milligram carbonated beverage. This year, it is a 100 milligram, it's actually 100 milligram drops, mixes, elixirs, and syrups. So that most common segment has shifted. That's always something to keep an eye on when we see someone kind of fall from the top and someone new come in and take their place. The other thing I want to point out is that last year in this drops, mixes, and elixirs and syrup segment, there really weren't very many units sold in the 10 milligram package size. With this year, we see about 7,000 units. So it's a 7x growth over last year. It's not, again, another trend to keep an eye on. I would really want to look at this next month and see if that continues to grow so that I can understand that segment. Also, I don't think I have it highlighted, but just above that in the drops, mixes, and elixirs, we see the 0 to 5 milligram last year at 10,000 units up to 25,000 this year. So again, here we're looking at some really rapid growth, 2.5 times growth over a year. So these are some places that I would be keeping an eye on if this is a space that I was either in or thinking about being in. The other way that I would look at this graph is if I were a retailer, it's important for me to watch this data over time and make sure I have the right stuff in the back. If I was using just things that I learned about last year, even a few months ago, I might go really heavy into, for instance, those 10 milligram carbonated. While they still are a really common segment, I think I would want to make sure that I'm really covering these drops, mixes, elixirs, and syrups as well, because it seems like something that consumers like. All right, that concludes our beverages section. So now we're going to move on into edibles and do a similar exercise. So in edibles, let's start by looking at the total market. So remember, I think we saw that edibles were about 60 million this month in a 90-day time frame. That works out to, around $180 million. Before, remember, Washington and Colorado had the largest sales. Now we see California. That's what we would expect. California is about twice the size of other states. But Steve, that teal bar there in California is not quite twice the size of that it is in Colorado. And maybe even Washington is a little bit lesser there in the edible space. So something to think about. The other thing I pointed out when we were talking about beverages was that the prices were relatively close together across the states. Here we see a very big difference in price, with prices in Nevada being over $20, and here in Washington, our average edible cost under $14. So good for us here in Washington with our not too expensive edibles. So let's dive in again and see what it's made up of. Oh, I'm sorry. First, let's see how it's growing. Oh my gosh, Steve, I almost got ahead of myself there. I'm just so excited about edibles.
Don't get ahead of the growth.
Yeah, no, we got to talk about this growth because it's great growth. So if we look, we see that Colorado has the largest market share there of edibles. This is in 2017. If we add 2018, everybody saw an increase in edible sales. And California entered the market, again, pretty strong with 13% there. California's had a bit of a decline this year, but everybody else, again, we see market share gains in edibles. What that means is the edibles category is growing faster than the other categories around it, at least the average category. Now we can look and see what it's composed of. Just a few more segments here in edibles than there are in beverages, for sure. I'm only going to call out the big ones. There are some smaller ones in here that I'm not going to focus on today, things like savory edibles or cooking ingredients. But our big ones, the first that I notice is, of course, gummies. And remember, we'll read this graph the same way we read the beverages one. So that bar up at the top, that's the first quarter of 2018, and it goes quarter by quarter all the way down to the third quarter of 2019. So what we see with that blue bar there in the middle is that gummies have really increased their market share throughout this time. The other thing that caught my eye was that chocolate's market share was declining. I'm not actually going to dig into that today, but I think that would be something really interesting to look into, to see if we could figure out why gummies are growing so much faster than chocolates and if there's anything there. I do believe that in gummies we see a lot of CBD and THC combined products, and in chocolates it seems to be a bit more THC or CBD, so perhaps that's a bit of it.
Liz, if I could jump in, I just want to have you distinguish chocolate from cookies, because the colors are real similar there. Can you comment on that?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. So chocolates are the teal color. So those are ranging between about 30% back in 2018 to 17% today. And then cookies are that greener color, sort of there between the chocolates and the gummies. Again, a bit of a decline there from about 7.5% a little over a year and a half ago to about 5% today.
Okay, cool.
Now let's look again at how the states are different. Remember, our states all looked really different before. Here, what we see is that 3 of our states look relatively similar, and Washington is the odd duck. So in our 3 states that do look similar, we see that gummies are a really substantial portion of the market. One of the reasons that gummies aren't quite so large here in Washington is there was some regulatory stuff with them a few years ago. There are a lot more gummies entering our market now. I imagine that share will probably change.
Right. So for those folks who are not in Washington, the regulatory stuff involved making it harder for me to get my gummy open.
Oh,
that's what it was.
I see, yeah. You don't want it to be too difficult to open. All right, so looking at this, I think we can kind of get an idea that most of the states are similar. The only other thing I wanted to call out is that chocolates are less common in Nevada than they are other places, and that California is starting to see some mints. So the very dark purple maroon bar up at the top, in Washington it's 9.27% of our sales go to mints. In California that's 6%. So those 2 states do see mints come into play, though not as much in the other states. So next, remember, we looked at things by the segment they belong to, and now we'll look at them by the size they are. So here we see a space that's very dominated by 100 milligram packages. So in beverages, they were most common. They were a decent portion of the market, but it was about half, maybe even less. Here in edibles, we see about 2/3, all the way up to 84% there in Nevada, of the total units sold are going to these 100 milligram packages. And so the only other thing to note maybe there, Washington has this really big group of 10 milligrams. We don't see maybe quite that large of a group anywhere else. And California has a whole lot of colors there, right? So maybe a lot more choice options in California. But since this market is pretty dominated by 100 milligram packs, rather than me investigating the landscape where we're looking at the segment and the package size, what I'd like to do is think of a third way to investigate these categories, and that would be by the price. Since we saw that prices were cheapest in Washington, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to investigate that and see what that could mean. So first, before we do that, what I want to make sure, because I'm going to do it by segment, is that all of the segments are dominated by 100 milligram packages. And that is the case. So we see in Washington that of those 5 large segments, I didn't want to put them all in this graph, you wouldn't be able to read it for sure, but of those larger segments, what we see is they are all dominated by 100 milligram packs. Perhaps a little bit of an anomaly there in mints with a lot of 20 milligram packages. But for the most part, we're seeing the bulk of the sales coming from 100 milligrams. So we are going to continue to dive into 100 milligrams. We're going to stay right in there, not 100 milligrams. So first, let's look at the prices. Remember, we had just the average prices of everything together, and now we're looking at it by category. So we see that gummies, caramels, chews, and taffies, and chocolates all right there together, maybe $15, $16. Whereas candies, maybe something a little bit cheaper. But the average price, before I do this one, I'm going to go back. Sorry to spoiler that for you guys. The average price isn't always the best way to look at stuff. And so what I want to do is break it down by price buckets. And the reason I want to do that is, just to give a very easy example, is let's imagine a segment that has only 2 products in it, Steve. A product that costs $10 and a product that costs $40. So the average price of those 2 products would be $25. But $25 doesn't tell us anything about how that segment actually looks. So what I want to do is investigate these segments a little bit more. What I want you to remember is when we were looking at average price, gummies, caramels, chews, and taffies, and chocolates all looked really similar. When we look at it by price bucket, they actually look kind of different. So while the most common price range in caramels, chews, and taffies, chocolates, and gummies, which are these 3 bars in the center of this graph, the most common package had its average item price between $14 and $16. That's that teal color there in the middle. However, in gummies, we see about 50% of units going to products priced at $16 to $18. These distributions are really different from each other. So while the average item prices were relatively close, what we see is in chocolates, there are a lot more that are on both ends. So we see a lot of higher priced items, greater than $20. That's the navy blue at the end. That's 15% of chocolates. Versus things that are under $12, that'd be the purple and the red there on the left, is another 15% of the market. So chocolates have a lot of expensive products and a lot of cheap products, whereas gummies have mostly products all in the middle. So it's one of the reasons that when we compare prices across categories, we want to make sure that we're not just looking at the averages, but the way that the price breaks down. The other thing I want to call out is that candies, remember we did see a slightly lower average item price for that. Those are very dominated by products that cost between $10 and $12. And then mints are very dominated by products that cost more than $18. So over half of the sales, 66% of the sales, in fact, are to products that cost more than $18. So those are the 2 blue bars, the bright blue and the navy blue. Just like we did for the beverages, what I want to do is compare this across time and see if it's different. Whole lot of colors here. No need to panic. I'm going to highlight the stuff that's important. So the thing that I think is most important, I'm going to just do it segment by segment, is that when we're looking at today, which is the graph there on the left, and we're looking at a year ago, which is the graph there on the right. Today, we see that a lot of the sales are dominated in this candy segment by that $10 to $12 range, is what we saw. That was fewer before. We saw more expensive candies in the marketplace before, about a year ago. The same is going to be true there in caramels, chews, and taffies. So here, when we look at products in the $10 to $16 price bucket, that's almost 50% of sales. Before, it was very small. We had a lot in the $16 to $18 there, 48%. So again, we've shifted there to the left. So we're shifting to cheaper products. If we go to chocolates, same thing here. If we look at the bright green, the bright blue, and the dark blue last year, we're looking at most of the sales occurring to products over $16. that has shifted. Today, we see most of the sales happening to products that are under $16.
Again, that's August this year on the left and August of 2018 on the right.
Yes, that's exactly what you're looking at, Steve.
Okay.
Similar story, same song, different chorus here with Gummies. Again, this graph is shifting toward cheaper priced products. Last year, 36% of sales were to products that were priced between $18 and $20. That's that bright blue bar there on the right. It's only 10% today, though. So we really see a pretty big shift. And then finally, our outlier. Every statistician really loves an outlier. Our outlier is mints. So if we look at mints, the way the market was last year, we see that 31% of the sales were to $10 to $12 products. That's the red bar. It's only 19% today. In fact, if we look at the very expensive products, those priced over $20, that's about a fifth of the market today, or 21%. Last year it was only 15. So while all four of our other segments have started to shift to lower price buckets, mints are actually going in the opposite direction and becoming pricier. So I thought that was a very interesting trend. It's definitely something I would want to keep an eye on and see how this is pricing, whether I'm a retailer or a manufacturer. Manufacturers to set their price with their retailers, but retailers to know what consumers are seeing on average. So we do see mints going up in price, but their sales growth seems pretty healthy. So I think that that's really about the marketplace. So what I would like to do is just do a quick recap. For the total market, we saw about $500 million of monthly revenue coming from our 4 states. The entire country of Canada sees about $90 million a month right now in Canadian dollars, though that is growing faster than the U.S. is growing. In fact, it's growing at about 6% month over month, which if that rate continues, we would expect the Canadian market to double by next year. Canada was dominated by flowers, but I think a lot of that's because there are no beverages and edibles yet. But hopefully I'll be able to do this again for everybody in the spring of next year, and we can look to see what Canadians think about edibles, especially because there you saw that our edibles and beverages were dominated by 100 milligram packages. I believe the limit in Canada is only going to be 10 milligrams. So we're going to see a really different product landscape there.
No doubt.
And then finally, we looked at the beverages market, where we saw it's about 1% of the adult use market, but the assortment is really different by state. And then we looked into the edibles market, which is about 10%, and was dominated by those 100 milligram packages, though the pricing was fairly different. So I think one of the big takeaways for me, if I'm in either the beverage or edible space, is that perhaps I should be looking for inspiration outside of the states I'm in to see what sorts of things exist and are growing, because it could be an opportunity for me to bring something new and interesting to my state. And Steve, that's really about all I have.
Well, that's fantastic, Liz. So what we're going to do is turn now to some of the questions you all have been putting through the Zoom Q&A section. Please do continue to put your questions there. And as Liz goes to review those, I just wanted to call out that we're hosting data nights all around the country. So watch for us in your area, and if you don't have a data night nearby, let us know and we'll get one set up. Secondly, we've got some industry reports available to our subscribers and non-subscribers. There's one on edibles, solid sales, steady growth, and then one on beverages, is weed the new beer? It's a deep dive into the cannabis infused beverages, also produced by Liz and her team. If you're not a subscriber, just go to headset.io and scroll all the way to the bottom, and you'll see links to recent industry reports there. Liz?
Yeah, absolutely. I have a whole lot of questions popping up. If you do have any other ones, feel free to submit them here. I'm going to answer as many of them as I can, but if we don't answer your questions, you can always reach out to us, and we can get you answers for those. I have a lot of questions about the beverages space, so I'm going to do those first. And one of the first questions was, do mocktails include cannabis beer? And the answer is yes. So for those on the phone that aren't familiar with beers, is what they're usually called. It is a de-alcoholized beer that's then infused with THC, CBD, or both. And those we put those in the mocktail segment here at Headset. They're definitely a growing segment for sure. They do not contain alcohol, so it is something that is why we call them mocktails. There's no alcohol in them. Mocktails also includes some faux wines. So again, a de-alcoholized wine that's been infused with THC or CBD. It also includes, we're starting to see a lot of, I guess, faux alcohols pop up, or faux cocktails. So we see things like a mojito, for instance. It'll be in a jar. It looks like a liquor jar, or like a real fancy bourbon bottle. And it may be, lime and mint flavored like a mojito, but instead of alcohol, it's infused with THC. Those are usually multi-serve beverages, so it's like a bottle and you would share it among people. Versus the can of beers, we definitely see those be single-serve. I've not seen any like really large can of beers. And then the wine, again, are usually packaged as multi-serve. We do also see at least 1 or 2 cannabis-infused champagnes. I think you have to call them sparkling wines. I don't think they're made in France. All right, so I just wanted to point out something that someone brought up. One of the people on the line brought up that in Nevada, there's a big presence for 2 Roots in low potency levels. So for anybody not familiar with 2 Roots, it is a can of beer company. I think they do like an IPA and a lager maybe, or an ale. They might even, actually, I think they have a handful of products. And they're packaged in, I think, 12-ounce packages, and again, low potency levels. We're talking 2, 3, 5 milligrams. So you kind of consume those more like beers, right? Maybe even someone as short as me can maybe even have, oh God, maybe even 3 of those. That's about how many beers I can have too. They really dosed those out right, didn't they? All right, so continuing along our beverages question, another question I had is the cost of beverage for single serves or multi-packs? The answer is both. So the way we think about, when we're looking at those costs, when we think about package size, we're actually really just thinking about the amount of THC in it. I think it is probably safe to assume that for most users, the 100 milligram packages will be multi-serve, maybe save for a handful of enthusiasts. They're high enthusiasts. Ooh, I got a pun in there.
High enthusiasts.
Absolutely, yeah. But other than that, I think when we're seeing the 100 milligrams, those are generally going to be multi-serve, and those lower milligrams are going to be single-serve. I got a question, in which category are shots? I've not seen shots, like a buttery crown or whatever, I don't know, kamikaze, but it could be in mocktails if it's if it is a faux alcohol drink, like a lemon drop or something like that. If you mean energy shots, those would be in other, I believe. Depends how they're packaged. Some companies are packaging their energy shots actually as tinctures, and those would go in the tincture category. So it really just depends. That's a new question for me. I never thought of where shots were. All right. So I had another question. What about the lounges for cannabis edibles? This was posted by an anonymous attendee, and I assume it's anonymous because I'm not yet aware of many places where it's legal to have a consumption lounge. There are a handful of cities and a handful of I think that San Francisco now does event venues where you can consume on-premise, but we really don't see a lot of on-premise sales just yet for either beverages or edibles. If beverages or edibles were sold at a legal adult use retail establishment as part of an event, or they had that license, then it would likely be tracked in our data. But definitely, for the most part, the consumption lounges I've run across might still be a bit gray market, which we don't cover. I was asked if we'll offer a series on CBD, either edibles or beverages, and I'm happy to report that we already did. So our last webinar covered CBD, and we looked a bit into topicals, a bit into edibles, but all of our data nights right now are covering CBD edibles and beverages. So we're doing those, we've done them in Washington, we did one in San Francisco and in Los Angeles. There's one coming up on the 26th, I think, in Santa Cruz, as well on the 26th in Denver. In Portland. So the 26th is Santa Cruz and Portland. The 10th is Denver. So if you're in Denver and you were really excited and thinking, oh, that's too far away, no worries. We're doing it on the 10th in Denver. If you're interested in learning more about those webinars, you can reach out to sales@headset.io and they can get you signed up for sure. Or if they're not in an area and you want to reach out, I believe we have some links to recorded webinars on it as well. I had someone on the line ask if we can send out a copy of a deck because lots of people in their org need to see those numbers. Man, that's a great comment. I didn't even put that one in myself. Yes, we will send out the deck. It will be available. I am not 100%. It'll be sent out afterward, I think, to everybody that RSVP'd. I'm looking at my marketing guy over here to make sure I'm not making things up. Again, I had another question if we do reports like this for CBD. Not only do we do reports, which we did do a market report, we have whole dashboards that are just focused on products that contain CBD in all 5 of those non-inhalable categories. These CBD sales are CBD at recreational dispensaries. So it's not the CBD that you see in perhaps places like CVS. But it's the CBD containing products in these rec dispensaries. So there are a lot of CBD only products, and then a lot of products contain some CBD and some THC. Those are legally sold in recreational dispensaries. Those can't be sold in other places.
We didn't get to attribute gummy sales to their potentially containing a lot of CBD on the get-go.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a big part of it. So if you are interested in learning more about CBD or getting insights like this, and actually even deeper insights like this, you can reach out, again, to sales@headset.io, and they can set you up with some demos of those dashboards. They're really excellent products. Let's see. I had a question about what falls into ingredients in edibles. Those are usually things like oils and butters. So I think there are a handful. There's like a couple flours and some powders that are like a sugar substitute, or they might actually be sugar even with some THC in them. Those are things that you bake with. So if you're someone with a degree in French pastry, let's say, who likes to bake, maybe you don't want to buy your cookies, you want to bake them for yourself. So those would be those types of products that the bakers buy. Sorry, I'm getting questions as I'm doing this, so let me awkwardly read through the questions. Steve, you want to make up some things to talk about real quick while I do that?
Yes, please reach out to us at sales@headset.io for links to previous recordings, especially on the CBD topic. Happy to share those with you, and perhaps we'll do a refresh on that in the very near future to let you know what's gone on in the CBD space, maybe in Canada, or how it's changed quarter by quarter.
Yeah, all right. Before I let Steve make up too much stuff, I can get back to the questions now. So someone asked if the Canadian sales numbers include exports to other countries. They do not. So when we're looking at the Canadian sales numbers, those would be sales in retail establishments in Canada. The top line numbers that I was giving you, the total sales by province, those are actually from Statistics Canada. They publish retail numbers. So I'd encourage you to Google that. I think it's just Statistics Canada, cannabis retail, and you can find those numbers yourself. The numbers where we're looking at the percent of the category or the prices or the brands even, again, that is just sales within the province of Alberta. That's insights data, and that's data that we sell. So if you're interested in learning more about the Canadian province of Alberta and what it's composed of, please reach out to us and we can hook you up with insights for that province. I believe that is all the questions that I have for today. I do have a couple of questions about the FDA's position. I try not to speak for the government, so I don't really know much about the FDA's position on stuff. I would encourage you to reach out to maybe someone in more of a legal career path for that sort of thing. And then the last question I had was, does my edibles data disregard sales that include CBD? Like, did I evaluate THC-only products? And the answer is no. I evaluated edible products sold in recreational dispensaries. So it could have been THC only, it could have been CBD only, it could have been a combination of the two. And if you're interested in how that breaks down and how it affects growth and prices, I'd encourage you to reach out to our sales team, and they can demo you those CBD dashboards. I think that's all the questions. If you think of any later, though, reach out to us, and we're happy to help.
Awesome, Liz. Thank you so much for what has been lavish, and I'm out of gustatory adjectives for now. But thank you very, very much. As always, it's a lot of fun listening to you run down the data like you've done here. So for everyone out there listening, you will have slides and a recording. And I don't know, can we call you back for an encore, or?
Oh, always. Man, these are my favorite. Yeah, for sure.
Okay, so we'll send out notifications as to the next topic and scheduled date for a webinar, and we're very much looking forward to it. So for everyone on the call, thank you so much for playing, and we'll see you on the next one.